Hello, I'm Bob Johnson. Welcome to another election special programme here on Wycombe Sound. Over the next 2 days, we will be broadcasting my interviews with the 5 candidates who are standing for election in the Beaconsfield constituency and who want your vote on Thursday, the 12th of December. In a few moments, we'll be hearing from the Labour Party candidate, Alexa Collins. At 6:30pm, it'll be the turn of the independent candidate, Dominic Grieve. And then after 7pm, I will be speaking to the Green Party's Zoe Hatch. Tomorrow from 6pm, we will broadcast the interviews with Joy Morrissey from the Conservative Party and the independent Adam Cleary. And all of the interviews with the candidates standing in both Beaconsfield and Wycombe, as well as the 2 roundtable discussions that we carried out, can be heard again on our website, which is wycombesound.org.uk. Tonight's first interview is with the Labour Party candidate standing in Beaconsfield, Alexa Collins, and I started by asking her to tell us a bit more about herself.
I was born in Slough, which at that stage was in Buckinghamshire before the county borders moved around, and later moved to Burnham. And I've more or less lived in Burnham or around Burnham for most of my life. There have been some big moves away from that, though. I've worked in Scotland, I've worked in France, I've worked in Africa, in Zimbabwe. I lived and worked in America for a couple of years as well. So I've been around a lot, and then I came back to Burnham.
So you must like it in Burnham then, if you've been to all of those places and you've still then came back to Burnham.
Absolutely. I thought it was a great place to grow up, and I came back when my daughter was quite young, and absolutely, I think it's a lovely part of the world, and that's why I like living here.
Tell us about your career then. So it's taken you off to lots of different places.
Absolutely. I trained as an accountant. Was the start of that's what I did at college, and I went on to certified accountancy, ACCA, and then I started working in systems, really. So it became a sort of finance IT type of role, which does tend to happen in a lot of businesses. I worked in the motor trade for about 15 years, and then moved into software houses that were specialising in finance systems. So I put finance systems into a lot of central and local government organisations. I put ledger systems into Her Majesty's Treasury, the Scottish Office, even the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, so into a central bank.
That must have been quite an interesting assignment.
That was a very interesting assignment. I hope that the system that we put in had enough zeros to cope with the subsequent issues in that country over the next few years. But yes, it's that's my background is in government finance, really.
And so, what about politics? When did you start getting interested in getting into politics?
Well, I was first on the doorstep, apparently at 6 months old.
Wow.
With Fenner Brockway in Slough in 1964. He didn't win, and I was out again 2 years later as a toddler kissed by Harold Wilson when Joan Lester moved into the she won in Slough. And actually that was a very big part of my life. My parents met through the Labour Party. My granddad was a Labour councillor in Slough for years. He was the deputy mayor. My Aunt Kate, she was also a Labour councillor there for years and years. So it was always part of my life. That said, I'd never actually joined the party. I just was always a Labour voter, although once living in Beaconsfield constituency, I can't promise that I voted Labour all the time, because there have been times when you'd have to vote strategically, and people may have said that Labour was a wasted vote in the past. That's not the case now. I think we proved that in 2017 when I ran the campaign for the candidate who was James English, and we came second. We took 21% of the vote share. We took 10% off Dominic Grieve. So Labour is the strategic vote in Beaconsfield.
Going back to your campaigning days, were you knocking on doors for Tony Blair when he was in Beaconsfield in 1983?
No, I wasn't. I don't know where I was in 1983. I could have been. I was probably commuting to France or something like that. I worked a lot in Paris. and I wasn't that involved. I was more of a tribal supporter rather than an activist and a door knocker as a kid. And I used to help out in Slough. I would take the numbers from the polling stations, from the tellers, and take them back to HQ and do all the sort of jobs helping my granddad and my parents with elections. So I was always involved as a youngster, but as I sort of grew up and was working and busy and commuting and flying all over the place, I wasn't so involved.
Okay, so what do you think are the important issues at the moment in the Beaconsfield constituency?
Well, it depends on who you listen to, doesn't it? I mean, everyone that is telling you it's a two-horse race and it's all about Brexit, and it's not. It's not all about Brexit, and it's not a two-horse race. In 2017, we gave 12,000 people a voice for Labour, and the thing that you find in a constituency like Beaconsfield, you know, everyone will tell you, oh, it's so rich, it's so affluent, here we are in leafy bucks. But the issue is that we've got pockets of deprivation throughout the area. And I regularly, I'm normally an education campaigner, that's my main thing. And what you find is that in those areas of deprivation, we actually have some of the worst education outcomes in the country, not in the county, but in the country. So whilst everyone tells you that education in Bucks is so great, actually, if you don't have money for things like tuition to get you to pass the 11 plus, you're not going to get the educational outcomes that other people in other parts of the country achieve. And that's because actually we're one of only 3 counties in the whole country where this arcane, stupid selection process actually happens. Everywhere else got rid of it and they have comprehensive schools. So I tend to campaign for that, and I think that's a big issue in this constituency. That
was going to be the next question, was what you feel about the grammar school system. So I think you've made that quite clear, that if you became the MP for Beaconsfield, you would look to try and scrap that.
I would look to try and scrap that. It's something I work on at a national level. I'm part of an organisation called Comprehensive Future. As I say, most of the rest of the country scrapped this back in the 60s and 70s. It is not a fair and equitable access to education for children. Since, I can't remember which year it was exactly, but since they did an admin reorganisation and brought the test earlier in the year, I don't know if parents, parents do realise, but whether the rest of the world realises that actually the national curriculum is not taught to the level that kids actually need. They don't get taught the content they need to pass the test. So pretty much, if you can't afford private tuition, it's pretty much impossible for you to pass the test. And everyone's got an anecdote about how they knew someone from the wrong side of the tracks who did it all without tuition, and now he's the chairman of ICI. But the problem is that the statistics simply don't back it up. So it's something I would campaign very, very strongly on. I do campaign strongly on it all the time.
Staying with the local issues, how do you feel about the HS2 project?
HS2 is something which I think we are all learning more and more about every day. Certainly on the finances, it appears that the financial analysis of that and how much it was going to cost has been total nonsense. The problem is that once you're this far in, how far do you get in before you stop digging? Is it more expensive to get out, or is it more expensive to keep going?
If you had that decision, which way would you go?
I would have to really do some heavy analysis on that. I think on the one hand, it's not just about shaving 20 minutes off a single journey. I think that when you're looking at any infrastructure in the nation, we should be looking to move forward and to update systems. We can't be using ancient systems that are a couple of hundred years old. But on the other hand, you do have to look at what is useful. And one of the reasons why the costs have escalated so much on this project is the further south you get, it's actually the cost of buying the land and the property that was woefully misunderestimated, because the north-south divide on property prices and land prices is astronomical.
Staying on transport issues, I realise it's a little bit outside of the constituency, but it still affects everyone. How do you feel about the expansion of Heathrow Airport?
I think it's the worst idea in the whole world. I mean, we already have some of the worst air quality in South Bucks, and it's nothing to do with the number of planes that come in. It's to do with the number of cars, lorries, trucks that are sitting stationary around the M25, the M40, the M4, all of these places. It seems absolutely ludicrous to me. We already have some of the busiest motorway junctions in Europe. Just on those 3 junctions, I think it is, are the busiest in Europe, and putting more planes into Heathrow so that more traffic can come through here seems total nonsense. I think it would have been much better to go to somewhere like Luton, which is a bit further into the Midlands. It's on transport links, it's on the M1, but apparently there wasn't already enough infrastructure there, so people didn't want to spend the money on doing it. But I've spoken to various lobbyists about that, but I think the idea of expanding Heathrow or Gatwick is utterly ludicrous.
Now, you have quite a rural constituency that you're looking to represent. What are some of the important rural issues in Beaconsfield?
I think one of the main issues, having grown up around here as well as a kid in Burnham, I could catch a bus to Beaconsfield, or I could catch a bus to various places to go north within the constituency or within the county. You can't do that anymore. I mean, it's absolutely awful for kids and for elderly people to have these local transport links simply disappear. It's unrecognisable, the transport network from when I was growing up. And it is those younger people and the older people who suffer from that. And it's not incidental that everyone else is out in their cars contributing to the terrible air quality that we have. We actually have higher mortality rates in South Bucks than a lot of other parts of the country. We're in the worst part. And having loads of people in cars is just a really bad idea. And you can't get a train within Bucks. You have to go into London and out again to get there. So I think buses is a real problem in rural areas.
What about the NHS? What are your thoughts on that as an institution?
I love the NHS. In fact, the NHS is why I moved back from America. I was 6 months pregnant and was fully planning to have my baby in America. And as the day got closer and closer, I totally freaked out, and I realised that there simply wasn't the care there to support me. The day that I saw an ad that said I was so special that there would be one nurse visit to me after I had a baby, and then started asking, where are the midwives? Where's the support? Where's the health visitor? Where's all the things that I need? And realised that they weren't there. Total freak out, and we packed in our jobs and moved back. And it was the best thing I ever did. Unfortunately, what I'm seeing now is an NHS on its knees in crisis. The care is still amazing, but the problem is you have to get to a critical stage to be accessing services. Waiting times have gone beyond. I mean, we're just not hitting the targets on that. It's woefully underfunded. Morale is very, very low. You can't carry on like this. And the idea of privatising it so that someone is taking profit out of it, no, let's properly fund the NHS.
What about Brexit? Obviously, it's a very important issue, particularly focused on Beaconsfield because of Dominic Grieve's stance. Where do you stand on it?
Well, OK, I'm a Remainer. That's what I was in the referendum. And everybody's telling me that this election is all about Brexit, especially in Beaconsfield. It's not. I've got people in the Beaconsfield constituency accessing food banks, and I think that that's pretty damned important. I'm not saying that Brexit isn't important. It is. But this is a general election. This is not a rerun of the referendum. This is going to elect a government supposedly for 5 years if we have the Fixed Term Parliament Act. So don't make decisions based on a single issue. There is so much more at stake here. We've got underfunded local services. We've got an NHS on its knees. We've got schools that are underfunded. We've got failing services in every direction. And it's only the Labour Party that are going to put the funding in place to put these things back together.
If you were elected as the MP and it came down to a vote, which way would you vote with regards to Brexit?
I would campaign to remain, but I do fully support the Labour policy at the moment. I think this government has made a total hash of the whole thing. We are the only party who are putting this back to the people for the final say after we've presented them with some accurate facts rather than the type of lies that have been told in the original referendum and the total botched management of this over the last 3 years. We would put together a sensible deal that protects workers and protects the economy, and we would offer that within 6 months of the election. We would offer that sensible, pragmatic deal back to the people with an option to remain and let the people have the final say.
You mentioned about food banks. I'd like to ask your opinion on homelessness. In Beaconsfield, I think it's very much a hidden issue. Possibly if you're in Wycombe, you see more people, say, on the street, but very much from what I'm understanding from Wycombe Homeless Connection, that in places such as Beaconsfield, there is still a big problem with hidden homeless.
I think there is a problem with hidden homelessness. Access to housing is a really difficult issue, especially in somewhere like Beaconsfield, where housing is incredibly expensive. Typically, homelessness on the streets, rough sleeping, is not visible, but that's not to say I haven't seen it in Beaconsfield this year. That's not to say that I haven't had someone come up to me and beg for money to get into the homeless shelter in Wycombe, and he needed £12, and this happens in Beaconsfield. People don't see it, they don't acknowledge it, they think it happens somewhere else.
I think the people from Wycombe Homeless Connection would say, though, that that's probably incorrect, that you need money to access their services. Okay,
I think that, yes, sorry, I've probably put that badly, but he needed to get on a train to get to Wycombe, to the shelter,
yes, okay,
because there's not a shelter in Beaconsfield, and these are people who are absolutely desperate. The same as the people using the food bank. People don't believe me when I say there's a food bank in Beaconsfield.
What about taxation? Where do you stand on that? Would you like to see taxation raised so that actually there is money to fund such things as the NHS better and our schools and the problem with regards to housing? Absolutely,
I would like to see taxation raised. This is not being raised from a standing start. This is being put back up to levels. It's been cut ridiculously. They've tried to make us this sort of tax haven. It hasn't been working, oddly enough. You know, we have a very low corporation tax, and the Tories want to try and drive it lower, bring it back up. Boris Johnson was completely misleading everyone when he said it would be the highest in Europe. It's not the highest in Europe. There are several other countries with far higher levels of taxation. It wouldn't be done overnight. It would be brought up gradually. And certainly on personal tax, it will only be the top 5% who pay anything more. I mean, we had this ridiculous situation on Question Time, whatever it was this week, where the guy said, I earn 80 grand and I'm not in the top 5%. I'm sorry, mate. Yes, you are. Yes, you are, because that's where it's at. And someone earning that kind of money, they'd have to be earning more. If they earned 81,000, I think they'd pay an extra, £7 a week or something. But if this gives us the opportunity to properly fund our services, then I fully believe that those tax rates should go up.
You've mentioned a little bit about the environment. What is your opinion on the recent protest by Extinction Rebellion?
To be honest, I think they're doing a great job. They are shining a light on the worst crisis that we've got ahead of us. Everything else is pretty pointless if we don't have a planet to live on. And I think that we have to invest in sustainable energy. We have to invest in a green industrial revolution. And this is about more than just looking at the climate issue on its own. It actually involves the economy. It actually involves the Labour deal involves reskilling the workforce to work in this green industrial revolution so that we can all have the things that we need and work in a sustainable manner.
If you were elected and you were to put forward a private member's bill, what would your private member's bill be about?
My private member's bill would be about selective education and ending the 11 plus.
Okay. When you're going around campaigning, I appreciate completely that Beaconsfield is a little bit of a different kettle of fish to how it has been previously, but certainly once upon a time, if you'd knocked on the door as the Labour candidate, people would have said to you, what are you doing? What are you wasting your time? Are you finding that this time, or are actually people much more engaged because they realise that actually this is a much more open race this time?
Well, what's interesting about knocking doors in the Beaconsfield constituency is I knock different doors to the ones that Joy and Dominic are knocking. And pretty much every door I knock says, wow, I've never had somebody knock my door before. Because of what I said to you earlier, people think, oh, well, there's no chance. There is a chance. And there are reasons why people should be voting Labour in this constituency. So I don't find people laugh at me as long as I knock at the right door. But do you know what? I've also heard stories about people knocking some pretty big doors up some pretty long driveways and being told, no, don't waste your time. I don't want your leaflet because I'm voting Labour.
Well, I can also imagine that particularly in the Stead constituency, actually, there's quite a lot of gates and bells and various things that probably means that actually you don't get to speak to the people that you want to speak to.
There are ways and means. You have to be persistent. Yes. You have to be persistent.
Yes, I can imagine that there are. Because of the fact that you've had such clearly a long career politically in the local area, do you think that there should be a change to the voting system, to a more fairer system for people such as those in the Beaconsfield constituency, where very much it has been a one-party constituency going all the way back to just after the war?
It's a one-party constituency, and you can look at that whether you look at the MP, whether you look at the county council, whether you look at the district council, whether you look at the parish councils. You can look at every level here. But there are independent voices, there are Labour voices. I do think that it would be good to move towards a system of proportional representation. However, I think the situation that we're in at the moment is that everything is hinged around this single issue. We're totally divided. We're a 50-50 constituency. I think it's really difficult to take decisions without some level of clear majority. And quite honestly, I think that until we can get past some of these issues, it's going to be difficult to know what would be a good system to use. So I'm not entirely. I'm on the fence on that one.
Fair enough. You also mentioned earlier about the Fixed Term Parliament Act. Would you scrap that if you could?
I would scrap that in a moment. I think it's done us really badly. It was introduced during the coalition to prop up a coalition government, which was really not a very good idea, and we have been absolutely strapped by that ever since. I think it's done us a terrible service.
What do you consider the role of an MP to be?
The role of the MP is to represent your constituents and to be their voice on matters of import. It's not a question of being a delegate to enact what's for those who shout the loudest. It's about you using your judgment, your experience, using your knowledge and your skills to bring about the change that your constituents need. And in Beaconsfield, we need real change.
If there was a decision that you disagreed with, if you became the MP, what would you then do? Would you vote against the party, or would you follow the whip?
Oh, risk the whip, risk losing the whip. I think you'll find that the Labour Party are not quite so strict as some of the other parties. We are a very democratic party. We arrive at policy by a democratic process, and if you've ever spent several hours in a compositing meeting at a Labour conference, you would know the pain that I'm talking about at the moment. But we discuss, we argue, we shout, whatever, but we arrive at a consensus of policy, which generally we would then follow because that's our policy. Where it may be different, we're normally allowed a free vote. So we don't have quite the rigorous systems of some of the other parties. It's a broad church, the Labour Party.
If you were elected, would you continue to live in Burnham, or would you seek to have a second home somewhere a bit nearer Westminster?
I wouldn't need to. I live in Burnham. I actually built my own house, and that's somewhere where I love to be, and I can catch a train into Westminster. That's absolutely no problem.
That was Alexa Collins, the Labour Party candidate standing in the Beaconsfield constituency at the forthcoming general election on the 12th of December. And you can hear that again along with my other interviews with the candidates standing in both Wycombe and Beaconsfield, as well as the 2 roundtable discussion programmes that we broadcast with the candidates in Wycombe and Beaconsfield on our website, which is wycombesound.org.uk. Coming up next, we'll hear from Dominic Grieve, who is standing as an independent in Beaconsfield.